Paul.
Hey, Fab.
How's it going?
Good.
Cool.
You?
I'm good. I'm okay. So
Fab's a trooper. He just got over COVID.
Well, I don't know. I don't feel like a trooper today. It feels like it came back with a vengeance. But we'll survive. It's funny because you want to talk about elevator pitches today, and I realized that our first ever show that we published, we recorded a few that we never published, but was about elevator pitches. So
all right, let's hope things haven't changed too much.
It's nice to see that a few years later we're still talking about the same thing. But you're putting an interesting, not spin on it, but interesting differentiation, the difference between an inbound versus an outbound. So I guess before we start, let's define what you mean by inbound versus outbound, just so we make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Well, that's a good point. So when we talk about inbound, it's let's say the elevator pitch we'll change that name first of all. So we're going to go from calling it an elevator pitch to the first conversation or the conversation start. So when we talk about inbound, it's after you've done any kind of marketing effort and someone has signed up to want to speak to you either on your webpage or they reached out to you on LinkedIn. So it's when you've done some form of marketing that's attracted someone to want to talk to you. So
gotcha.
So that's inbound. So you've sent some kind of message, you've put out some kind of ad, and they're like, hey, I want to talk to you. So you have a little bit of information. So obviously that first conversation will be different than if you're doing outbound, which is cold call. And then I'm just calling you up. You don't really know who I am. So the approach will be different.
Okay.
I don't mind the term elevator pitch because a lot of people use it, but it mostly doesn't happen in an elevator. And it's not really a pitch. So that's why a colleague of mine, Sylvie Morissette, who you know very well, and we did a thought experiment a few years ago, and we came up with the term conversation starter because it's not about selling something, it's about starting a conversation. But it's about starting the conversation on the right foot. Now, a lot of people have spoken about this. A lot of very smart people have called it different things. And there's a whole slew of ways you can do this. But really, the point of your conversation starter is to start the conversation. And that's
right. So the point of the elevator pitch is really to start the conversation. I mean, I get that it's called an elevator pitch. I guess it's also, there's a time constraint, right? It's not, the goal is not to jump into this massive monologue that'll last 35 minutes. The goal is that it should be able to last the length of a elevator ride so that by the time the person steps out, they want to talk to you some more, right? They want.
Yeah, I mean, and if you're in a B2B space and you're selling a complex service or product, you don't have time to pitch your product in 2 minutes on an elevator, right?
Right.
So really what you're trying to do is start a conversation and at least, well, there's a few things. You're trying to see if there's a fit. Mm-hmm. If you should even bother speaking to each other at a business level, if you can help each other out. And two, to get the person talking to you about what they do so that you can see if you can help them out. So it's a very short, it's a short intro. I mean, the whole conversation starter, elevator pitch, whatever you want to call it, lasts maybe the tactical space, the tactical apparatus that I call conversation starter lasts maybe 1 minute max, if not 30 seconds.
So this is going to sound like an obvious question, but there is a little flavor around it, I guess. Who's delivering the elevator pitch? And obviously it's sales, right? Like to a certain extent, like some sales function. But I also want to take into account like what we talked about with Alyssa Miller like a few weeks back, which is like kind of this presence of these sales development representatives. So these more usually junior, but not necessarily roles whose business it is really whose goal is really to develop business for sales teams. And so then is it just really like kind of, and maybe this is splitting hairs and maybe there's no question here, but is it like, should every person that's touching a person have this sort of conversation starter? based on what their role would be. And because I'm even thinking like customer service, right? At some point they pick up a new client. Should they be thinking about how they want to kickstart a conversation with their new, in their case, a client, or should an SDR think about how they want, obviously kickstart their conversation with somebody they're cold calling?
Well, yeah.
And it was an account executive who's like kind of picking it up from an SDR, want to think about how they're starting the conversation.
Well, there's definitely in your process, you know, you're having those first conversations. There are obviously the introductions and whatnot, but when we're talking about the elevator pitch or the conversation starter, it's really the first contact. So it's really that BD, the SDR, or the business development person who's talking to the client, the prospect for the first time. So once they're a client, I wouldn't call it a conversation starter. You are starting a conversation. I wouldn't call it an elevator pitch anymore.
Gotcha.
So I think it's that first contact. So if you're the president of the company and you're speaking to someone for the first time, it's a conversation starter or an elevator pitch. If you're the salesperson talking to someone for the first time, whether it's after inbound or an outbound, it's also a conversation starter / elevator pitch. So who is doing this and when are you doing this? It's really your first conversation. Who's doing it? Well, it's the person who's having that first conversation. Usually it's a salesperson. Are they business development? Is it, you know, whatever you call them? It's that first conversation. And the purpose of that elevator pitch or that conversation starter is really to discover if there's a fit and if you should continue the conversation.
Right.
If I was to give you a really stupid analogy, but as you know me, I love stupid analogies, or simple. I shouldn't say stupid, simple. You know, if you walk into a shoe store and, you know, the person, you know, obviously the salesperson wants to know if you have interest in buying shoes, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, you might just be walking in from the rain. So the conversation starter is going to be, hey, how's it going? How can I help you today? You know, are you looking for shoes? You know, sorry, no, I'm just walking in the rain. Well, then you're disqualifying them.
Are your feet wet?
Yeah, are your feet wet? Exactly. I'll give you some boots. No, but you know what I mean? So you're discovering if there's a fit. And that's the purpose of your conversation starter.
Yeah.
What I don't like about the term elevator pitch is that someone's saying, okay, I've got 2 minutes. Tell me what you do. That's a pitch. And that's a pitch, and that's a very different approach, and that's something different, you know?
Right.
But that's like shooting bullets in the dark, because you might have a great pitch, but if you don't know what the other person's needs are, well, you're just shooting blindly, right?
Right.
So if you walk in from the cold and the rain in my shoe store, and I assume you want to buy a pair of shoes, and, you know, I just go right into, hey, what shoes can I help you with? Well, actually, I'm not looking for shoes, right? So it's very simplified, but that's so.
Gotcha. So, you know, so to me, like when I hear elevator pitch or conversation starter, I mean, let's stick to elevator pitch. And I know you're not super fond of the term, as you just mentioned, but it's not really pitching. It's about, not really about pitching. It's really about starting the conversation, like you said. But the impression I get, and I've sat through sales trainings and all that, and I'm realizing that was just not a good impression, is that it's like it's like a script, right? Like that's what that was when you say elevator pitch. That's what popped into my mind anyway. It's like it's a script, right? Like your salesperson starts, and part of their training is learn the elevator pitch, right? But you're saying that we need to vary it or modify it or adapt it to the person that we're talking to, right? Because if I'm starting a conversation, I'm not going to be approaching the same. I'm not going to approach you the same way that I would approach your neighbor, or should I?
Yes and no. So here I'm going to say some controversial things, and you're probably going to say, really? So yes, you should script it, and no, it shouldn't vary that much. But remember what I said. It's only 30 seconds, maybe a minute. So because this is before you even know who you're speaking to. Do you know what I'm saying? So you're not varying it that much. You're being polite, and you'll see what I mean here. But you're briefly introducing yourself. You're addressing the person with their title and their name, and then you're mentioning an issue that you think they might have, and you're seeing if they're attached to it or not. and then you're asking them a question. So yes, it should be scripted at first, but it should become natural.
Right.
So I'll give you my elevator pitch, all right, or my conversation starter. If I was let's say I'm, I don't know, let's say I work for a SaaS accounting firm. So I'd say, hey, Fab, my name's Paul Lafleur. I work with XYZ Accounting. I help lead accountants like you who are unsure that they have the best online services with their clients. And I was wondering if you're facing this situation. That's my conversation starter.
Right.
That simple. Now, is that scripted? Yeah. I introduced myself. I addressed you directly. I spoke to you of an issue and associated it to you, and then I asked you a closed question.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's let's say 80% of the conversation starter. So I'll go through it slowly, and you'll see. So hi Fab, I'm Paul Lafleur. So one, hi Fab, I'm Paul Lafleur from XYZ Accounting. We specialize in nuclear power generator accounting. Okay, then two, I help lead accountants such as yourself who are unsure. So I said unsure. I could have been positive. I could have said, instead of saying unsure, I could have said who are excited about. So that's number two. So then I'm putting you in a category of excitement or not. And then three, that's three who are unsure. And then and I was wondering, so four, I was wondering if you're facing any of these challenges, right? So then you're going to answer me. You're going to say, hey, Paul, actually, no, we don't really. By the way, this is an outbound one. So Paul, no, we don't really have those problems. But then people are saying, oh, wow, fuck. Sorry. We're up Schitt's Creek. He just said no. Okay, bye. See you later. Then you hang up, you run away. No. Then you say, oh, that's, then you can say something like, oh, wow, well, how did you solve that problem? You are starting a conversation, right? Then it's an open-ended question. And then Fab, you'll say, well, actually, our nuclear power plant accounting has been doing pretty well. We just signed with another company 3 months ago, but we're not sure we have the best service. Oh, tell me more. That you're starting a conversation.
Right.
So the whole conversation starter, brief introduction, address an issue, an opportunity they might have, ask them if they're facing it, and then open-ended questions. It's that simple. Why should you script that at first? To get it in your head.
Yeah.
To put it in your head. And the purpose of that, and that's why I don't call it an elevator pitch, because I haven't told you anything, right? I haven't pitched anything, right? I can't call it an elevator pitch. I haven't pitched you anything.
Yeah.
The pitch part will come. Let's say it's a really long elevator ride, and you say to me, well, what the hell do you do, Paul?
Yeah.
Well, the SaaS company that we work for has specialized in nuclear reactor accounting. Everything's covered in lead.
Wow. I don't know where you find these examples.
So essentially, then the conversation starts. And then then there's a whole other bunch of stuff that you need to do. But that may sound, and the beauty of the conversation starter is all in the tone, your voice, the speed at which you speak, and give the time to the person to react. So if it's in an outbound call, you need to be calm, poised. You might even say, hey, Fab, I'm Paul. I've tried to reach out to you a few times. Is this a good time? Then you might say, no, it's a terrible time, or I only have 2 minutes. Say, hey, that's all I need. Then you have that. Then you go into that script, which is introduction, address a person directly, mention a specific issue that they are going to tie themselves to or not, and then ask that closed-ended question, and then ask your open-ended question. It's that simple.
Mm-hmm. So then if you're saying, what's that? Sorry.
So it is.
Yeah. Scripted. So then if you're saying it's not adapted, so then let's get into the thick of the subject, which is inbound leads versus outbound leads. I'm guessing there's some sort of adaptation there, because that was a whole topic you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, and the adaptation is that now. So let's say it's an inbound lead. right? So now it's going to be more to the effect of, sorry, I just want to, actually, I'll do it later. No big deal. I was going to, I was going to share something, but it's not necessary. So, because the people who are listening won't see it. So essentially, when it's an inbound lead, so let's assume you've done a marketing campaign and someone's wanting to speak to you. Well, then they've signed up, they've answered a few questions, they've given their name, their company size, they may have said how much they spend a month, and then so suddenly it's going to be, hey Fab, I'm happy to hear from you. I can see from the web page that you're having issues with such and such. As you know, here at XYZ Accounting, we specialize in such and such, and I'd just like to hear a little bit more about your issue. So you're going to jump in right into the open-ended question,
right?
Before you do your demo, before you present anything, right? Unless you've got this great inbound marketing process that you've asked, a bazillion questions, and people come in super qualified and they know exactly, and you know everything. Then you might confirm, hey Fab, so you spend this much a month, you've got these issues, you're worried about this. Is there anything there else that I need to know, right? And you'll say, no, it's all there. You got it exactly spot on. Then I might say, then you might just jump right into a demo, but then you don't need the conversation starter then,
right?
And that's a rare. Let's say that's rare. Okay.
Yeah.
It's rare that someone's gone on the website and answered you like 75 questions that you need to know to be able to do it. But if you have that system, fine. If you have a product that's super in demand and you're just trying to close the deal, well, maybe that's okay. But usually you've answered a couple of questions and, hey Fab, I'm gonna need to ask you a few more questions, and then you jump into it. So your elevator pitch basically is, hi, I'm still Paul from XYZ. Thanks for taking the time here. If I understand correctly from what you've said to us, you're facing these issues. Could I know a little bit more about it? And then you're starting your conversation there. It's a lot easier, obviously, on the inbound. Right. It's a lot smoother, but there's still a form of script there. You're mentioning what they've filled in on the web form, if that's the case, or you mention, the name or what they've given you, because usually, you know a few things, and you go from there, you introduce yourself and you ask the questions. The conversation starters uniquely built to bring you to a questioning strategy so you can find out more to see if there's a fit. So you're in the continuous process of qualifying.
That's interesting. I like the way you presented that. It's positioned so that you can ask further questions. I like that.
Yeah. And why, before I said, why is it scripted? And I always suggest to people at first, even like practice, role play it, scripted. So, hello, I am Paul Lafleur from XYZ. Thank you for taking the time to speak to me. We help presidents like you, Fabrice, who are concerned about, it sounds scripted, sounds terrible, but script it first, then make it your own.
Yeah. Yeah, because the more you know what you have to say, then you can, if you're big on contractions, you can add contractions. If you like saying hey instead of hi or hello or whatever, then you add in your own thing. But yeah, I mean, that makes sense, right? It's practice, right? It's like anything else you would practice: soccer, skating, swimming, math, right? Like at some point you get comfortable with it, and then you can develop your own approach to it.
Sorry, there's a caveat I want to make here.
Yeah.
Super important. Have you ever noticed, I know you've worked with salespeople a lot, right? Have you ever noticed one salesperson will say what seems to be exactly the same thing as another salesperson, and number one has way more success than number two? And you're going, well, I don't understand, because they're saying the same thing. Well, what it really boils down to is that, and you know this because you're married to a psychologist, but human interaction is also based on certain things, cues that that are beyond the words you're saying. So how you say them, the speed at which you say them, how polite you are, the pauses you take. So all of that in the first 30 seconds is really important. So if you're speeding through your elevator pitch, I don't like the word, but your conversation starter, and you seem really rushed and you seem stressed out and anxious, well, you might not have as good results as the other person who's more calm and has a better disposition. There's a reason they say to you, you'll see this in any call center, and it's basic human psychology. I mean, we're talking, less than 101. They say, stand up and smile. So you'll often see people in call centers, they're standing up and they're walking around, and people sense that even though you're not seeing the person, you can tell if someone's like this or like that, because we're so in tune to that. We cap these things. So this is important. So you have to be in a good state of mind, or the proper state of mind, when you're doing those pure cold calls, and you have to be, you have to be positive. The other thing too is you have to have some sincerity. If the person feels that what you're doing or that speech is insincere, I don't know what it is about human beings, but we have these radars. It's like, no, bullshit, and they close off, and they feel.
Yeah, because you can always tell when there's a normal human interaction going on versus not, right? And I think it goes back to what you're saying. It's about the practice. The more you practice it, the more it becomes yours, even though you're saying the same thing. And then Steve and Mary could be saying the same thing in completely different ways and having the same success, because the foundations are there, right? They're helping the same type of customers with the same product, but Steve has a different approach than Mary, and that's it. Like it's theirs. But like John, who just started yesterday, and he's just learning the script, and he's bumbling through it. It's not going to have the same success. It's normal. And the more they can practice it, the more they can, just say it over and over and over and over again and record themselves. And once I was working with somebody where they would put the new reps on like lost accounts or churned accounts or lost deals, because they're like, the success rate of those are so small anyway. Like there's no worry that a junior rep will like burn through good leads because they've already told us no once. And then that's it. You can hear them. They're dropping the ball, so to speak. They're just having a hard time with it. But the more they practice, the more they can adapt it, and the more they become normal with it, right? It just becomes like a part of how they start a conversation.
But I want to challenge you on that too, because how many times have you? I mean, we've all gotten telemarketed less and less in the last few years, but probably because I don't have a home phone. Think of the times you've been telemarketed and that person knows their script so well. You can tell. You're like, oh my God, because they're going through it so quickly, and there's no sincerity in the voice.
Yeah, I think it's more than that, right? You're getting paid. Like there's a big difference between being called up at 6 p.m. before you're sitting down for dinner, and you have somebody pick up the phone. It takes like a 2-second lag before they kick in, before their software kicks in the actual call. Like, it's just, you're also starting off, you're not starting at zero. You're starting like below zero in terms of reception. Whereas a cold call in a business context, you're calling at 2:53 p.m., on a Wednesday, like it's just like
not. Fab, I certainly hope not.
whatever, whatever. But it's just, there's a different context to it, right? Like I think that's a big play as well. Just like
we often underplay that. A lot of people underplay the factors that are actually a lot easier to control. And it's a lot easier. I think once you really know your script really well, you've got to tell yourself, I'm talking to a real human being on the other side of the phone. I'm not just saying a script. And I've got to talk to them as though it's the first time I'm saying this, and I have to mean it. And I think your words will come out in a much better way. What you say actually is important, but it's equal. How you say it is equally important. And that's what we tend to forget a lot. We really do,
Yeah. So there's something I wanted to ask you, because, especially the past couple of years where like a lot of companies have gone fully remote and everybody's communicating in different ways. And you even mentioned, right, you don't have a home phone anymore. A lot of people don't have office phones anymore, right? There's just all a cell phone. Like how should you deliver your elevator pitch, right? Because you're not always having calls anymore, right? Like you talked about inbound leads before. Often the first communication you'll have with somebody is like an inbound lead will be by email, right? Like you're just confirming that you got the request. You're trying to send them a scheduling link, or sometimes the first interaction you'll get is a Zoom call, right? Like that's the first time. Like, is your can you do according to you? Like, can you do a conversation starter by email, or should you tailor it if it's on Zoom versus a phone call? Like, there's a lot of different mediums out there.
Yeah, I know.
How do you approach all that?
It's a very good question. I don't think you can do a conversation starter by email because the interaction is not back and forth. It's not an
Right.
open way communication. Probably at the limit, you can do it on a text or some kind of messaging thing or some kind of chat. Like if you're chatting on any
On LinkedIn
social,
or whatever.
anything, yeah. If there's immediate back and forth, that can happen. But in an email, you can write an introductory email, but it's not it's a different form. I won't call it a conversation starter. For me, conversation
Right.
starter has to involve live. When I say live communication, I mean interactive communication. So if you're doing it on Zoom, it's the same thing. So let's say I'm meeting you, like we're on a form of Zoom here, we're video, we're also video and audio. So if I see, it would be about the same thing. It would still be, hello Fab, I'm Paul Fleur from XYZ accounting firm. I would say it just about the same way. I wouldn't change it that much because my authenticity and my words are the same way. Now, the difference when you're doing a Zoom call is I can look at your face, I can look at your reaction, I can look for reactions, I can see if you're really involved. Like if you're, I'm on my phone right now and I'm doing this and I'm reading my text while I listen to you, and you're saying you're giving me your elevator pitch and I'm not really there. Well, I might slow down a little bit, or I might pause. I might even pause. Like if I see you're looking at your phone, I might just pause and wait for you to finish, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the Zoom, that's where you don't just keep going while the guy's, if you can tell, if visibly you can tell he's looking somewhere else. I often do that. I'll just, particularly when I'm speaking to people, I'll say, hey, is everything okay? And I'll wait. Oh, yeah. Just, my daughter's in school and school's calling me, and okay, do you want to take a minute? Well, so you have the advantage of being in the room with them. So obviously take in the visual cues. If the guy starts yawning, going, oh man, he doesn't say it, but he's like, okay, bored. Then you might say, oh man, I hope I'm not boring you. You use humor. So yes, there is definitely some adjustment when you're doing it live. When there's video, when there's visual involved. So yeah, that's for sure. You're taking that into consideration, but that's basic. Well, I say it's basic human. It's basic human knowledge, but you've got to consider when you're in sales and you're talking to someone for the first time, you're doing the conversation starter. You very much have to be aware of the person who you're speaking to and making sure you have their full attention. And the way to get someone's full attention is to ask them a question to get them to talk about things that interest them. It's a hack. It's a human hack. If I don't know you that well and I want you to talk to me, I should ask you a question about something that matters to you. If we're standing in line in a grocery store, you and I, okay, we're both, no, it's not a good, we're standing in line to buy our tickets for a concert we want to go to. Okay, we're both standing, we don't know each other. We're next to each other and we know it's going to take half an hour. And I want to start a conversation with you. I'm not going to say, hey, I'm Paul and I do this and I do that and I go here, and you're going to be like, oh God, boring. What I'm listening to, and we do this philosophy, hey man, and Paul, why do you like this band so much? We do it instinctively. Oh man, I saw them in Chicago and in New York. I really want to see them in Toronto too. It's super exciting. That's why I'm standing in line. And then all of a sudden, that person, they barely know you, but they want to talk about why they love this band.
Yeah.
But rarely it can happen. But if I start saying, oh, I love this band, I saw them here, I saw them there, yeah, I might start the conversation, but you're much more likely to have a positive reaction if you ask them a question. And that's what your conversation starter does. You're asking them a question about what matters to them. And that's what's important. I forget what your initial question was, but
No, the question was just about what do you do? Because let's say we're not just on the phone anymore. Actually, it's probably increasingly rare that you're on the phone. with prospects, right? There's a lot of LinkedIn messaging and SMS and WhatsApp and emails and obviously Zoom and Google Meets and all those stuff. So obviously there's a certain adaptation, and I guess that brings me to kind of the last place I wanted to bring to, obviously,
Can I
go
press pause on that? Sorry, Pat. Can I press pause on that just 1 second? You're right. I just want to say this because I think it's really important. A lot of I never get cold calls on my phone anymore. Right?
Yeah.
Once in a while I do, and today, in the last 5 years, or last 2 years, or last 3 years even, I'm much more likely to answer my phone from an unrecognized phone number because I get them less and less. So if you do have someone's phone number and you are looking to do a cold call, it's a golden opportunity. I know a lot of presidents, a lot of CEOs, a lot of high senior managers that will answer their phone. And so don't discount that. You writing an
No,
email,
I don't think it's a matter of discounting. I think it's just a matter of they're harder to get by, right? It used to be able to, you can dial into the company, and if you were agile enough, kind of get your way to the right person.
Yeah.
But in a world where, you're remote, and there's, some companies are just
It's harder.
removing all phone numbers from their site,
Yeah.
It was more along those lines.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, you said you wanted to ask another question, and I rudely.
Yeah, and then we could kind of, so obviously I have an ops service, and that's a lot of what I think about. And elevator pitch, conversation start, whatever you want to call it, is I find a little trickier to add into the system, right? Because the only way I could see it, like, how would you help your reps remember? Obviously there's the practicing, and that's part of the manager's job to make sure that especially newer reps, not necessarily young, but newer reps are practicing their pitch, and they have adapted it, and it's part of the coaching and the training that you're giving. But where, and I have some ideas obviously, but where would you put that, in their CRM, so that when they're about to call Paul, or call, John, or call Melissa, they have that in front of them?
Well, interesting you should say that, Fab. Because I'm working with a client. I'm working with a client right now, and we're reworking the sales process, and they're integrating that sales process into the CRM. And with this client, we've created a video playbook. So right from the start, in the outbound and in the inbound, we have one of the first parts of the first step is your conversation starter. And then we're linking that directly to a video, and then for them, they have to look at my ugly mug. And while I talk to them for 2 minutes to explain to them what that specific conversation starter is like. So if your question is, how to remind yourself, it should just be, you might not have a video, but just have it up there, conversation starter, with a link to a PowerPoint or a Word, whatever, a PDF that just says this, remember to do these different things. And what I would say is brief introduction, address the person with their title, tell them how you can help them, and then ask them a question, a closed-ended question to see if they're facing that. So the most important thing is briefly say, well, I help blah, 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 like you, who have this problem or are excited about this opportunity. Putting in an adjective there is good, who are unsure, excited, I mean, you're a human being, it's either a positive or negative emotion. There's a slew of them to choose from. And then you ask them, are you facing these challenges? And then if they say no, it's an opportunity for a conversation. You might be disqualifying them. Hey man, we've done great. We're working with your competitor. Our sales have gone up by 3,000%. Okay, very happy for you. Not happy for me. Happy for you. Keep going. Or it's an opportunity to have a conversation. I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, actually, no, things are, no problem and everything. And then I start talking to them, and then we discover that there's something else that I can help them with. I can say that 50% of the times that I've done my conversation starter in the last 3 years, it's usually no, everything's fine, and then it just starts a conversation. Oh, how did you solve that?
Right.
And it's also, you're not just trying to sell them something immediately, you're trying to start a conversation. And that's also a state of mind. It's like, I'm not just trying to pitch my product as quickly as possible. We're talking the B2B space here. If you're selling $3 pencils and you're on a time limit, it's a different approach. But if you're a product or service, a complex sale where you're just starting a conversation, because your goal is to qualify them. Whether, hey, is this someone I can help, or is this someone that I can't help? one or the other, right?
Yeah, and that's why, like, I agree. Like, that's probably where I would put it first and foremost is in your playbook, your HubSpot, if you're using
Yeah.
HubSpot playbook, and just like, because you're expecting your reps to kind of prep the call, right? Like, sure, it might be a quick sell, right? Depending on what you're selling. So the prep that they're doing is maybe a couple seconds, and they're just loading that playbook and making sure they have all their points, and then boom. Or maybe you have a more complex sale and they spend more time, less calls, more time preparing. But I think that's the best place to put it. I mean, if you don't need to have a video, you could just have your text right there and your three
Yeah.
bullets
Yeah.
of what
Exactly.
you adapt.
What I
And
would
because
say,
your hope is
Pat,
also that they've practiced it. So these are just reminders, right? They're just like, right, okay, I need to, because it's in the heat of the action, right? You're picking up the phone, you're logging into Zoom or whatever, and it's sometimes easy to forget, right? Like that you need to start with your conversations, because a lot of prospects also will be like, they'll jump right in and be like, who are you? Like, what are you doing?
Exactly, and it's good to have it written down. It's good that it's part of your HubSpot. It's good as part of your RevOps. It's good because it's a reminder. I'll give you an anecdote that happened to me just a couple of weeks ago. So here I work in an office, and I've got a bunch of real estate brokers that are my neighbors here. So we all share a space and stuff.
Mhm.
And I did a little training with them a while back. And then I was walking out. They were having a little conference room. It's sort of an open space, and I'm walking through to go to have my lunch. And one of them turns to me and says, "Paul, what's your in your conversation starter, they asked me about one of the steps, but I was so much in another place that I blanked out." And here I am. I'm the guy who trains this stuff. So it took me like a couple of seconds, and I said, and then I gave them the answer. So all that to say that your CRM, your HubSpot, your whatever CRM you use, we'll say HubSpot because you're a HubSpot guy. Your CRM is there to remind you of those steps. So you have it in front of you. You might know, you may have done it 10 times, but it's just there to put it in your mindset again, to do it properly, to do the right things at the right step, to have your milestones ticked off. So it's going to remind you, conversation starter. And then you might have little notes in there, intro, address the person, issue, close-ended question, open-ended question. Then it'll be a lot easier. And if you've done it 1,000 times, it might be in your brain, and you might have another cue saying, slow down, or be sincere, or, every client's a human being. So these are little cues that are in there in your playbook, just to remind you to do it properly. And depending on who you are as a person, if you're someone who is a little bit more introverted and tends to be a little cold, and your wife says to you, well, you're really cold when you meet people, or your husband says to you, you're really cold when you meet people, well, then, okay, I got to put some more humanity into it, but still be respectful of my personality. If you're someone who's overly exuberant, who tends to speak 1,000 miles an hour, well, then you might say, okay, got to slow it down and tone it back a little bit, If the impression when you do your cold call is, hi, hey, can I help you out? Well, then, okay, pull it back. If you're like totally calm, like, hi, these are all reminders to personalize it in that playbook to make sure that you're doing it the proper way. Because I'll say one thing, there's nothing more important than those first 20 seconds in your whole sales process, because the human being there is the person you first talk to is all lizard brain. It's all whatever you call amygdala, and they're judging you partially on your word, partially on your tone, partially on it. They're deciding very quickly if they're going to tell you to F off or if they're going to speak to you. So you got to be on as much as you can to be able to read that person and have them want to at least speak to you, so that they're not discounting you for some lizard reason. So for some lizard brain reason that you just happened to step on their shoes the wrong way, whereas you could have totally helped them out. You could have had a great conversation, but you were too much in their face and you were a little too energetic and you pissed them off. So now your $100,000 solution will never be presented to them, because in their mind, they made up their mind to say, you're out.
Paul, as usual, this has been fun. Thank you for your knowledge and insight, and we will talk next week.
Thanks, Fab.
All right, bye,
See you later, everyone.